as you saw in that intro, I used the Sony a6000 with the 16-50 kit lens. There is one major cinematic movement that you need to start using right away, and I'm going to talk about it in this video. So the Sony a6000 is still a relevant camera even though it's late 2019. Now there are plenty of other APS-C cameras in the Sony range that have replaced this camera, but for 5 years old, this thing still does quite well. So I'll go through some settings that you'll need to know and some tips on how to get similar shots in my intro. There are some cinematic movements that you'll need to do in order to optimize your B-roll. If you're into product videography, love to shoot short films, or even just B-roll for your YouTube channel, you need to consider some other shots other than your basic handheld shots, your basic tripod pans and tilts, or even just your basic gimbal shots. So using a camera slider can make a massive difference, and it's really, really hard to replicate this movement. There is a cool, cheap budget idea to replicate this movement using a towel underneath your camera and sliding it across a table. It gives you a very similar movement and similar look, but there is always just that margin of error. Most of the time it doesn't look very pretty and it can be a little bit jerky, and it may take dozens of attempts just to get something very similar to a camera slider. You can even attempt this with a gimbal. The only issue is you'll have a problem with the Z-axis. So that's that up and down movement. That is very, very hard to avoid when tracking across a subject. The only thing that will come close is actually using a dolly. Now, large professional setups could cost you thousands. I mean, you can get some cheaper ones at Amazon, but you do have to set up your camera on a tripod and then slide it across the floor. There are a couple of little dollies that you can set your camera up on, and it's like a little cart thing that you put your camera on and you can slide across. I mean, that can still work, but it still won't be as smooth when it comes to the camera slider. So the main thing when you are using the slider to make it look much more cinematic is to add a little bit of depth to the footage. So what you can do is you can include something in the foreground that's, if you do have a wide sort of establishing shot, you're sort of tracking right in front of it. The difference between a clean wide shot and a wide shot with something in the foreground is a massive, massive difference. This camera slider here is manual. It's not an automatic camera slider. It is nice and cheap. You can pick it up for, I think, 299 bucks on B&H Photo or Amazon. This is by Zpon. It has a certain resistance to it where it goes really, look at that. It is super smooth. So you can see the resistance there. I'm just letting it drop down, and it's not going really fast. There is some nice resistance to it, so you can get that nice smooth motion. Now, this is going to be a lot easier than all those other options to get a nice smooth track. The great thing is this comes with a tripod mount at the bottom there, so you can quick release the plate, chuck it onto a table, and away you go. You can put it back onto the tripod if you need, or put it straight onto a table, onto the floor, however you want. It makes it so much easier and a little bit more versatile. Now that intro was shot on the Sony a6000 and a kit lens. Obviously the part where I'm filming the Sony a6000, that was filmed off my a7 III, so that's the only part that was filmed with the camera I'm filming on right now. But the a6000 can still really give you good, nice, crisp, clean footage. Now, the only thing with the kit lens, it does have a variable aperture of 3.5 to 5.6. So that is going to be a little bit difficult and a disadvantage when you're trying to get nice depth of field. But you can still really get some decent bokeh with this. Even though it is a 5.6 aperture at the higher end, say 15 mils, all you need to do is be a little bit closer to the subject. So bokeh all depends on the focal length, sensor size, and how close the subject is to the camera, and obviously the aperture as well. But that's obviously one thing that we can't adjust with this, having a larger aperture. We have a smaller aperture with the kit lens, so you're going to have to get a little bit closer to the subject. So you can see there is some nice background compression, and you can just obviously see there is some depth of field there, even at 50 millimeters at f5.6. The settings on the A6000 were pretty straightforward. Now always make sure you're shooting in manual. You need to be in full control of your ISO, your aperture, and your shutter speed. Now I did shoot all the ZPon slider clips at 25 frames per second with a shutter speed of 1/50th of a second. And I filmed all the handheld sequences at 50 frames per second with a shutter speed of 1/100th of a second. Now the reason why the handheld shots was at a higher frame rate and a higher shutter speed is that I could slow it down in post and make it look a lot more smoother. That is probably going to be the issue with the A6000 because it doesn't have IBIS inside the camera itself. Whereas the lens has OSS, so that does make a big difference when you are trying to get some nice smooth handheld shots. But like I said, I shot it at 25 frames per second on the ZPon slider because it is super smooth and there is no camera shake, which is absolutely incredible. So the main point of this video isn't really about the ZPon camera slider, it's more about what you can achieve with the A6000 and the kit lens. Don't limit yourself because you think you have really old gear and obviously not expensive gear. All you need to do is be creative with the type of shots you use. So use this camera slider shot and obviously have that subject in the foreground or background just to create a little bit more dynamic in that movement. So if you like this video, guys, please hit that like button. That would be absolutely amazing. Very much appreciated to all my subscribers thus far. Comment below if you have any questions. Guys, my name's Jason Morris, and I'll see you guys in the next video. All right, let's get it.